Hello everyone, my name is Tony Murata, but many of you probably know me better by my Moto username Into Play. I'm a huge fan of the Legacy format, specifically this 12-post deck, and this is my first attempt at making some recorded video content to accompany the streaming that I've recently started on Twitch. So I'm going to start with my first video here today with a deck of the Mono Green 12-post list that I've been working on these last few months. So before I begin, I should probably explain a little bit about my own Magic background and my history with this post deck. So I first started playing 12 posts in Legacy in late 2012 at some smaller local AZ events, and I pretty much instantly fell in love with it. The deck it most reminded me of was my favorite deck I ever played in Standard, which at the time was actually called Type 2, was Tooth and Nail. And if you don't know, Tooth and Nail was a deck that spent the earlier parts of its game assembling the Tron lands. I guess it was closer to Tron in Modern today. And then once it had 9 mana, it would cast the big spell Tooth and Nail to win the game. So basically, yeah, this basically felt like my favorite Standard deck from back in the day, like Tooth and Nail, this 12-post one. And actually, this deck felt like it was everything that the Tooth and Nail deck was trying to be. It ramped to even more absurd amounts of mana because Cloudpost, it generates exponential mana. The cards surrounding the deck, the lands, the cards that helped you operate, just function so much more smoothly than they did in Tooth and Nail. And also the win conditions were just so much better. So yeah, it seemed like if Tooth and Nail was at its best, or like I said before, what Tooth and Nail was trying to be, was this 12-post deck. Yeah, the deck back then, it was running blue and green. A lot of the card choices were different. It had a show and tell side plan, and of course it had the card Sensei's Divining Top, which was the best one-drop for that deck, helping you filter cards, but I'll explain more about that in a second. Even though the cards in the list have changed in this deck over all that time since I first started playing it, the basic game plan and underlying philosophy of the deck has always stayed the same. Your game plan just revolves around you surviving and then just making enough land drops to be able to harness the power of your lands to pass some massive quick win condition. Which Emrakul is the best one here. So anyways, yeah, I instantly fell in love with this deck. I got rewarded very quickly. I won an SCG Open with this early 2013 in San Diego. And then winning that basically established my path in Magic from there onwards. And since then I've just committed myself to playing this deck exclusively. I'm just always tuning lists and trying to be the best that I can with this type of deck. So yeah, it's been almost 8 years since I started playing this in Legacy. My Magic life was just going along so merrily, but then tragedy struck and they banned Sensei's Divining Top. So I think that was early 2017. Losing Top is basically the end of an era for this deck. A lot of people thought the deck was just going to be dead, but I wasn't ready to just give it up yet. Despite losing its best card, the land-based strategy of this deck was still intact, and I thought it was still worth building around. So I just started experimenting with several different variations of the deck. And ever since the top ban, I've just kind of been soul-searching, switching up the general shell of the deck. I'll change up the whole deck at a rate of about once a year. I'll just change up the build pretty drastically. So yeah, let's see, 2 years ago I was running a Bug Sultai version. Last year I was running a Mono Green Ancient Stirrings Karn the Great Creator version. And 12-post fans would know that as the colorless green list. And even those versions and the other lackey, kind of crazy lists that I was trying out were good and fun in their own ways. The deck always had this just very fundamental problem with its mana base. I was never satisfied with it. I could never really find the right balance between color-producing lands and the locust lands that would allow you to ramp. When Top was legal, top being like a form of colorless card filtering, it allowed you to get away with just a minimum number of colored sources. Like just enough colored sources to be able to find with your top, but then not too many that they were taking up the spots of like your other ramping lands, specifically like the copy lands, like more of the Supas and Thespian stages. So basically with all these other variations after top, I basically was always forced in like one of two different directions. Either I could go heavy on the fetches, the duels, the basics, so basically kind of like a typical legacy deck, to have just consistent access to the colors of the deck, but then I just wouldn't have enough of these copy lands to really capitalize on the ramping ability, which is like the point to play this deck. Or the other direction I was forced to go would just be having more of these your land slots dedicated to your ramping lands, but then you just wouldn't have enough color producing lands to like find them consistently, and thus you can never guarantee like being able to play your colored sources. So that was just always the challenge with building this deck after top. It's mostly the mana base. But all this changed now, just like the last year or so, with the printing of Once Upon a Time. So with that prologue to the 12 posts, I'm just going to call it post, the post deck from here on out. With that prologue out of the way, I'm going to just start talking about this deck, this list on hand. And like, believe me when I say this, because I don't like to brag about my decks or anything like that, so don't take it that way. But this like green version of Post is just like on a whole nother level. Like, compared to any other Post list since Top got banned. Like, I just like can't say enough about it. It's for as long as I've been playing this deck in Legacy, like I've never had another list like come close to the level of consistency that like this particular version has. Post Top at least. Like not even close. So yeah, so let's go like take a closer look at like the cards in the list. I'm going to start with like the two fairly recent cards in this deck that just like completely alter the way it plays out. And those two cards are Once Upon a Time and Elvish Reclaimer. I don't know why Moto is like not showing the art in some of my pictures, but whatever, that's Moto. Okay. So yeah, let's start with Once Upon a Time, because that's actually the more important of the two cards. As I was explaining before about how top like would enable like a balanced color / ramping mana base, Once Upon a Time like similarly solves that deck building restraint the way top did. Like I see Once Upon a Time in this deck as a color fixer above all else. Like if I have a free Once Upon a Time in my opening hand, I'll prioritize it and use it to find a green source if I don't already have one in hand. So that has allowed me to get away with only running 8 color-producing lands here. And, yeah, how was I going to this? Okay, yeah, so you have your 8 actual green-colored lands, and that would never be enough for a typical, like, green deck in Legacy, of course. But I'm considering these 4 Once Upon a Times, just for deck-building purposes, as green sources as well, which brings the total number of green sources to 12. So this is all just assuming that a Once Upon a Time that's in your opening hand will be able to find a forest, which, I mean, that obviously won't always happen all the time. So it's not truly a green source. Like, you might whiff on finding your forest, or the opponent might counter your first Once Upon a Time. But you have to make compromises with this deck, trying to build it at some point, and I'm just like more than happy to take my chances with Once Upon a Time. I've just been I've been super impressed with how consistent this card is at delivering the green mana. You just over the course of a game, you don't want too many green sources in play. Just the key is to find an initial forest, and then use that one forest to be able to at least cast your green cards and just be able to go from there. So, yeah, so Once Upon a Time, it starts the game like no other card possibly can. Even when you're casting this later in the game, kind of like as an impulse effect, the card's just very likely to find something useful to advance your game plan. Like, it very likely is going to find another land drop to make, But if you're lucky, you can find like a Primeval Titan or a giant Eldrazi to help close the game. And honestly, I've been like really impressed and kind of surprised with how many opponents will counter one of these that I cast later in the game. Like, not saying that's wrong, and it probably is correct to just counter it, but just the fact that like an opponent is forcing a card like this, it's just so low cost and low risk to us. It just feels so good in this deck. It's like, I just can't say enough about Once Upon a Time. It pretty much like single-handedly revitalized the 12 post deck for me. So yeah, so this card is incredible. It's also very good at finding the next card that I want to talk about, which is Elvish Reclaimer. And I'll be the first to admit, I completely underestimated how good Reclaimer was. Like, I never built my post lists in the past around a creature that needs to stick around and play. So I was just being pessimistic and just assumed that this would always be answered too frequently to ever be, like, dependable. But I was just so wrong. What I failed to see, really, was the upside situations of this card when your opponent is not able to answer it. And in those spots, like, Reclaimer is just phenomenal. Like, it's a 1-mana card that wins you the game. It's a 1-mana Cloud Post Factory. If you can keep it alive, then you just don't even need to draw any of your Cloud Posts. You just need to draw any land, and the Reclaimer will just convert it to a Cloud Post for you. So yeah, that's pretty powerful for this deck. As far as playing Reclaimer in the post list goes, the best advice I could give to anyone looking to play this list is just to focus on activating Reclaimer every single turn. Like, you want to make the most of this creature while it happens to be alive, which in Legacy, like, creatures just aren't going to last long, and thus you want to try and get a Cloud Post out of it every turn. So in your fair matchups, you just want to focus on activating Reclaimer every turn. If you're thinking of like using mana instead to play like an Expedition map or a Once Upon a Time, don't do that. Just save the mana to activate Reclaimer. Like, as long as you can keep hitting your land drops, an active Reclaimer will just develop your mana on its own by searching up Cloud Posts and just allow you to play like anything later in the game. So yeah, the point is, like, in fair matchups, use Reclaimer every turn. Like, I can't stress it enough. In like unfair and like combo matchups, Reclaimer's also really good there. It's pretty much good in like any spot where Crop Rotation would be good. Like, for example, you might want to hold up Reclaimer to find Bojuka Bog against Reanimator, or have it ready to search up Glacial Chasm when Elves goes to try and kill you. The card also searches up both Thespian Stage and Dark Depths, which is the deck's like relatively quick way to win the game. So being able to search up like the 2020 combo all within a single card, the Reclaimer, makes it an eventual win condition against these combo decks. So yeah, that's a positive for sure. The card, it's forced me to learn new play patterns in order to make the most out of it. Like, for example, if I have an active Reclaimer out, I might prioritize playing out the worst lands in my hand first, simply to feed them to Reclaimer, which is something I never would have done before, in any list before Reclaimer. Then if the Reclaimer later gets answered, the Cloud Posts and Glimmer Posts that I've been holding back in my hand will end up being like the better land drops for the later stages of the game. And yeah, one thing I should note when you're playing the Reclaimer, it's usually a good idea to keep at least one forest around. Either one of them in play, or keep an extra one in hand, just to be able to play your green spells later. But any excess forest you get, any other land besides a Cloud Post, it's usually just better to turn it into a Cloud Post. So yeah, remember, activate Reclaimer every turn. Like, that's the point with this deck. So yeah, Once Upon a Time, Reclaimer, both incredible cards, both like real shots in the arm for this deck. So let me just get to explain the rest of the list here as logically as I can. Look at the green cards in the deck next. Crop Rotation has always been the original reason to run green alongside Cloud Posts. I don't think I need to explain too much about this card, since it's pretty common in some other Legacy decks. In Post, Crop Rotation is kind of it's a pseudo defense against Wasteland. If an opponent goes to wasteland one of your lands, like let's say a Cloud Post, as long as you have the green mana up, you can crop rot away the land that was going to get wasted. And if the crop rot resolves, then you don't end up losing any tempo. Like, you just don't end up down a land that you would otherwise. And if it does get countered, the crop rotation, you're going to lose that land anyway, so at least at that point you've like fought through at least one counter spell. Next we have Green Sun Zenith. Since this deck is based around Reclaimer, we're running Green Sun Zenith to help search it up. So Green Sun is obviously not a new card, but it's a new inclusion for me in 12 Post. Jungasari played this card to much success in the past. I've always liked the idea of Green Sun being able to search up like Primeval Titan, but none of the other green creatures, like options, like really ever impressed me. Or that was at least until Reclaimer got printed. So this is just kind of like my personal opinion on how I've always wanted Green Sun to work in this deck. But I've always wanted to have like green creatures that you would just always would choose to search up like every time. Like no matter what. I never really wanted like a toolbox of green creatures. I never wanted to put in like junk like Scavenging Ooze, because I feel like the land toolbox that's already in this deck is already like good enough. And any potential green creatures to Green Sun for should basically just supplement the lands. So yeah, from like a potential Green Sun deck, I wanted consistency from the card rather than versatility, like the way Maverick might use Green Sun Zenith. And with Reclaimer now as a card, like I can finally build around Green Sun Zenith the way I've always wanted to. You're pretty much only using this card to search up Reclaimer or Primetime if you happen to have the mana to do so. So no need to litter the deck with too many singleton green creatures. Although I was willing to make a couple exceptions for a couple of one-of options for green creatures. I think a Crucible of Worlds effect and a Naturalize effect are just like generally good enough in enough spots to warrant having a single Ramunap Excavator and a single Reclamation Sage. And I've been happy with those two inclusions for sure. We also have the newest card in the deck, an Allosaurus Shepherd, which it opens up enough potential lines to like be worth including. And so far I've like loved this card. Against the blue decks, when you're just expecting a ton of counter magic, you have this in your library to be able to search up and help you jam through your important green cards. If they don't end up countering your Green Sun for one, then you search this up, and then you just are just ready to play a Keen Green spell like immediately after. It's kind of like a preemptive Veil of Summer, when you just play it before your spell and then just use that to clear out the way for counter spells. I really like having this card here to help resolve crop rotations in particular. If crop rotations have been like rotting in my hand, I'll wait until I have enough green mana to be able to search Shepherd up, and then at that time point, just fire off the crop rotations that I can, just to help them resolve. It's like doing that could be really useful in finding your first Cloud Post, which, you know, a lot of games just finding the first Cloud Post is the most difficult. And Shepherd is also here for a lot of specific matchups, especially combo matchups where you have like a key green spell that needs to not get countered. Like for example, against Sneak and Show or Omnitel, you want to be able to search this up in order to guarantee that your Force of Vigors will resolve. So yeah, lots of specific spots where this card is incredible. Primarily Green Sun is going to be Reclaimer, or if you have the 7 mana for Primetime. 3 Primeval Titans I find to be the correct number. Like any less than that, I feel like you run the risk of drawing into both of them, and then all of a sudden, like your Green Suns from that point forward can't be a Primeval Titan anymore. So yeah, 3 is enough to make me comfortable, enough to think that that's probably not going to happen. People like see my list, see Green Sun, and they always ask me like, why no like Dryad Arbor? And basically, like, there's never a situation where I would choose to use a Green Sun in hand to search up for a Dryad Arbor. Like in any other case, or any time, I would much rather just wait an extra turn and use it to find a Reclaimer. This Reclaimer is just so good for this deck. And yeah, like I said before, just think of Green Sun pretty much only being Reclaimer or Primeval Titan. Like, nothing beyond that really is necessary, and especially not Dryad Arbor. So yeah, that's our green cards in the deck. Let's take a look at the lands over here, which I've divided into 3 different groups. Our post lands, our colored sources, green sources, and the singleton lands. So, yeah, as you probably already know if you're watching this video, the name 12 Post is just kind of like a general name for decks running Cloud Post. And that's just regardless of the number of posts you actually happen to be running. But funny enough, this particular list actually is running 12 posts, if you count these copy lands here. Yeah, 4 Cloud Posts, 4 Glimmer Posts, that's standard. And then 2 each of Vesuva and Thespian Stage. These 2 copy lands, Vesuva and Stage, they have their own distinct advantages and drawbacks. Vesuva just gets the copying done automatically when it comes into play, just making it just quicker at copying whatever you want. And it will also copy a land's triggered ability, which for this deck is either the Bojuka Bog Graveyard Sweep or the life gain from a Glimmer Post. Thespian Stage has the advantage of becoming different lands, multiple different lands over the course of the game. Plus it also just allows us to run a Dark Depths and have that combo to potentially kill people. Also, Thespian Stage, and I'll get to this in a second, but it's an untapped mana source, which is very important. I'll explain a little bit that in just a second. But yeah, I've been happy with 2 each of Vesuva and 2 Thespian Stage. I think that gives me enough some different options, but also a second one. I've just been happy with that quantity of each of them. We have our 8 green producing lands, 7 basic forests, and then this 1 Misty Rainforest. The single fetch land is here to search up with Reclaimer. It's for the sole purpose of speeding up Reclaimer growing to a 3/4. Typically with this deck, you'll activate Reclaimer on your opponent's end step. So if you have the window where your opponent taps out, you can end of turn search for this fetch land, and then on your turn sack the fetch land to find another forest. You have your 2 lands in the graveyard at that point, and then your next Reclaimer activation will just immediately grow the Reclaimer outside of bullet range. Just found it to be a really nice effect to have access to at the cost of a single basic being a fetch land instead. So yeah, definitely include a fetch land in your colored sources for that reason. And then the good old one of lands. Eye of Ugin. This is the most important card in the deck. And as weird as it sounds, this is the reason to play the deck. In a deck that's all about finding and playing out its lands, there's 1 land there that essentially serves as a win condition, and that's Eye of Ugin. So this card ties the whole deck together and provides a payoff in the form of a land itself. So yeah, this is the reason to play Post. Just a land that wins the game for you. The second most important land, what I would say, is Glacial Chasm. And I could just write a small book probably about how to use Glacial Chasm. And yeah, as I was preparing this deck, so the more I think about it, I probably will make some sort of content, an informative video, or an article or something, just about this card in particular. Because yeah, I could just go on and on about it, and it's just one of the most important lands in the deck. It's your all-around defensive answer to taking damage. Some decks just simply can't beat you while this is out in play. It does require a ton of resources and effort to be able to make use out of, but it's completely worth it. The most basic piece of advice I could tell someone about this card is to always have this card just in the back of your head. Just keep it in mind. Once you realize you're in or against an opponent, where Glacial Chasm will be like the key card. I call those kind of matchups Glacial Chasm matchups. Just immediately be prepared to focus your game plan around finding this card, and then like playing the game with this in play until you're able to win. Basically, like any aggro or combo deck that's just looking to overwhelm you with combat damage that doesn't also have Wasteland, I would consider like a Glacial Chasm matchup. That would include Elves, Hogak, Dredge, even a few others. And just more generally, I always like having this deck, this card in like deck, to be able to find off a Primeval Titan trigger, just simply to survive another turn or two. Against like any deck that's looking to kill you via damage, which is the vast majority of decks, really. You never know when you'll just need that critical Primeval Titan to finally hit play, and then you're able to search up that chasm and just prolong the game just enough to like squeeze out a win. Pretty much anything that's winning with damage, which again is like almost every single deck, I'll just always keep a chasm around for. I just pretty much never board it out. So that even includes something like Miracles that's going to try and kill you with a Big Entreat the Angels. Like, they're still going to win through combat damage, so just keep this in play for, yeah, just to save yourself, because you never know. Karakas, Bojuka Bog, these are just staples in decks with crop rotation. Karakas has the added benefit of being able to bounce our own Eldrazi and recast them. Cavern of Souls, this is mostly there to name Giant and make a Primeval Titan, cast from hand, uncounterable. Also, you can name Elf with it, and in a pinch, it could be a 9th green source for an early Reclaimer. Maze of Ith, I've never really been the biggest fan of this card. I feel like Glacial Chasm kind of fills the role of defensive land much better, but especially the way this deck is built now, you just need a critical mass of like any lands to be able to feed to Reclaimer. So since Reclaimer can just eat any land, playing like any of these one-of lands just feels a lot like less of a cost than it used to, and Maze is just like perfectly fine in that kind of a spot. And rounding it out the lands is Dark Depths. This stated before, it's there to give you the 20/20 combo together with the Thespian Stage. Only go for that, though, if you're desperate, or if your opponent gives you like the perfect window to do so. Because if that ends up failing, you'll end up having lost like 2 lands, and you'll just like set yourself so far back from your usual game plan that you're probably just going to lose from that point. But it's definitely worth having around, for sure, for pulling a quick one on opponents. Something just in general I should mention about lands, if you're looking to make tweaks to my list or try building your own post list from scratch, one thing to keep really good track of is the number of untapped mana sources in your deck. Like, I would say that it's just as important as the number of locust lands or the number of colored sources, if not more important than those, to keep quantified. So as a post deck playing its own 1-drops, I want enough untapped lands to be able to reliably have 1 mana turn 1 and 2 mana turn 2, just regardless if I had like the right colors or not. That it might sound really stupid or obvious, but for this deck, just with a bunch of come into play tap lands and lands that also don't add mana on their own, like, that's not a trivial thing to have guaranteed 2 mana turn 2. That second turn 2 mana is just important for 2 of the cards in the deck, being able to activate Reclaimer on turn 2, and also Expedition Map second turn. Turn 3 and forward, I'll start playing lands that don't immediately add mana, like come into play tapped at that point. But I can operate just fine as long as I have my 2 mana to be able to function. So yeah, that's the key. The 2 mana is key to just being able to activate Reclaimer every turn, which is obviously the take-home message of playing Reclaimer. Just you want to have enough untapped lands to consistently be able to have 2 mana turn 2. This list is running 16 main deck untapped sources. I personally would never go less than 15. Like, I think it's just going to be too inconsistent running 14 or less untapped sources to be able to have the mana you need to operate early game. So yeah, that's my explanation for the lands. Let's look at the colorless cards here. First, the giant win conditions. Emrakul, Aeon Storm, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. These are always going to be in your list. Emrakul is just the big ultimate game winner. Ulamog is like your Swiss Army knife for late game situations. And then I'm running this Kozilek Butcher of Truth. People always ask me like why I play this card, and like I will say, like your third giant Eldrazi, if you're running a third one at all, it's really up to your own personal preference. Like I've tried all the other giant aliens there, and Old Kozilek just, well, first of all, it's just my like personal pet card for this deck, and always been like my favorite big Eldrazi. But it's also just delivered the most consistency for me, in my experience. Like the Annihilator trigger of this, just it makes this card a threat to the board, unlike some of the other options do. And I think that makes the card consistent more with the other threats in the deck. I mean, as a whole, we're a deck that's looking to dominate the battlefield, so Butcher of Truth eating 4 permanents will really help you catch up on board if you happen to be able to attack with it. So yeah, I've tried all the other options as well, and I just don't like them as much as Butcher of Truth. And I brought up all the other ones up here. Just, I guess I could talk about a little about these. Old Ulamog, I think it's just completely outclassed now. It's just bad out of the conversation. Second, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger. If you choose to run it, it's not a terrible idea. But when I'm at the point of the game where I'm just not quite at Emrakul Aeon Storm mana, but have enough mana to search up one of the smaller Eldrazi, I prefer like some diversity, like in that like other threat spot. Just some variation in what I'm able to search up. And Ulamog's just not, in most cases Ulamog is the best answer to search up, but it's not always. For example, in one spot, an opponent might have like too many creatures for Ulamog to answer. And in that case, I would want a Kozilek to help draw more cards and draw into some other answer. Say, like, to draw into a Glacial Chasm, or something that would lead to Glacial Chasm at that point. New Kozilek, I think the countering ability is kind of overrated. Like, it's true if you are against a combo deck and you get like a 10 mana Kozilek in play, this new one will be better against the combo opponents. But like I said before with Butcher of Truth, I prefer just this older one being a bigger threat to the board. Just Annihilator just makes the card. It's the selling point for the card for me. And then lastly, Emrakul the Promised Land. I've just found it to be too inconsistent. Like sometimes the Mindslaver effect just doesn't do anything. And also the extra turn an opponent gets could be a real liability. So, yeah, this is just, I can get the same thing out of it every time, and I can expect to get the same thing, which is why I would choose this card. And also, don't underestimate the card's shuffle ability when it goes to the graveyard. Just having another way besides Emrakul the Aeon Storm to shuffle key cards back into the library just gives the deck more inevitability, and just it makes the deck just feel more like endless, I guess, to be with the theme of Eldrazi. Yeah, just more endlessness, more misery, continuous misery for control opponents, just shuffling stuff back in. So yeah, this is my personal favorite. I'll always run this one as a third choice. And then then just 8 mana artifacts to round out the rest of the main deck. 4 Expedition Maps, 4 Pithing Needles. Map just doesn't look fancy at all, but I found it to just be so direct and to the point at like everything this deck is doing that it's just completely worth it to me. Like early game, it'll help you find your first Cloud Post, or it'll even find a forest if you really need your green source. And later in the game, Map is just a threat on its own, since it can find like Eye of Ugin or Cavern of Souls to guarantee a prime time. When Top first got banned, my first thought was that Map probably would have to carry a lot more weight, since it gives you action and things to do even when your colors aren't figured out right in a given game. And so far, I think map just is that important. Like, I'm convinced that every Cloudpost deck should probably be running a full set of maps, assuming it's running like its own 1-drops. Just, this card kind of feels like a cantrip for the post deck. And then Pithing Needle, this is an answer to Wasteland above all else. No matter how bad Wasteland supposedly is in a metagame, you're always going to encounter multiple Wastelands over the course of a tournament. Just the card is just that prevalent in Legacy. So a simple hate card like Wasteland against us requires a simple answer, and Needle is just that answer. Like nowadays also, Oko, it's such a commonly played card that I definitely don't mind having the full set of Needles to also answer that card. So I probably name Oko as much as I name Wasteland these days. I mean, Needle just stops any Planeswalker for that matter. So plus just a whole ton of different cards depending on the matchup. Like pretty much every single matchup, there's something decent to name with Needle. Like running in this card is pretty important for us just as a form of disruption. Because as a mono green deck, we obviously struggle in the creature removal department. So it really doesn't feel all that terrible to have a 1-mana answer to Planeswalkers. It's like the Swords to Plowshares, if you will, against walkers. No, it's not that good, but with Needle being as versatile as it is these days, it just feels like a card that you have to run. Or, yeah, let me say it differently. Doesn't feel like a card that you have to run. It's more so a card that you get to run. It just feels like so nice to have these easy answers to Planeswalkers. Despite it just being a temporary crutch in a lot of situations, it's just an easy way to answer an Oko. Or to keep Wasteland at bay long enough to get something going. Also, this card is, like, oddly enough, it's better on the draw, since you'll get more information, see what the opponent's on, before you have to commit a Needle to something to name something. So in a game where just going first is just always better, it doesn't feel terrible having like a consolation prize for the times you go second. So yeah, I love Needle. Just would not run without it. It's kind of my religious belief. So okay, that's the main deck. Let's just talk about the sideboard real quick. Building the sideboard with this deck, I try to avoid running like narrow answers, and instead just focus on cards with broad applications that can just be brought in for a variety of different reasons and matchups. First, we have a full play set of Carpet Flowers. This is for Delver more than anything, but with blue so common as it is in Legacy, you can really just bring these in against any blue deck. Carpet is specifically here for blue opponents that have a ton of creature removal. Like when Reclaimer being a creature is such a huge liability, like in the face of like multiple bolts or fatal pushes or swords, the goal is just to land a carpet and then just bypass the Reclaimer phase of the game. Just not having to search up Reclaimer at all, and just going directly to, bridging directly to Primetime mana. So yeah, this, the purpose of this card in this deck is to avoid having to use Reclaimer when, the opponent has plenty of creature removal. Alright, for Force of Vigors, most forms of hate against this deck, of non-basic hate, are in the forms of artifact or enchantments. Blood Moons, Back to Basics, Winter Orb. Force not requiring any mana of its own allows you to hopefully fire it off as soon as possible, just effectively dodging counters that your opponent might draw into if instead of this card you had like an answer that you had to spend mana for. Like, just like anything. Like, I was going to say Crowsun Grip, but I mean, that just can't be countered anyway. But, yeah, just being able to play this quickly is, like, the key, like, one of the main strengths of this card. And also, just, in general, a ton of decks will accelerate their own game plan by playing something like a Chrome Mox or a Mox Diamond out, followed by a Chalice or a Sylvan Library or an Exploration or whatnot. And Force just hitting 2 of their cards just gives our deck like a devastating answer to counteract like an opponent's speed in those kind of situations. And of course, this card is also just our best answer for Chalice of the Void in general. Surgical Extraction, Mindbreak Trap, these are answers to various combo decks. The deck is just weak to combo, and these are just pretty versatile in a lot of situations. Walking Ballista, it's kind of become my honorary 4th giant colorless creature that I would love having main deck to search with the Eye of Ugin, but I just can't figure out what I would want to take out from the main deck to squeeze this in. So Ballista will just have to remain being the all-star from the bench. Tabernacle comes in against any deck looking to go wide. It can easily answer like an army of goblin or zombie tokens. The best use of this card is to stall an opponent from casting a devastating card on top of like their pressure from creatures. So like for example, like the best example I can think of is stopping Death and Taxes from playing a Cataclysm together with like the creatures they're pressuring you with. Or similarly, like you can stop Rug Delver from casting Oko, stop ninjas from playing Back to Basics. Or if they do want to play those cards, force them to like get rid of a ton of creatures. Definitely try and get a hold of one of these cards, a Tabernacle, if at all possible. Just because I've always considered it like to be one of the best uses of a single spot in this deck. In a land full of, in a deck full of land tutors, like this is well worth a spot if you can get a hold of it. And the last card we have in the board here is, it's a goofy one. Mikokoro, Center of the Sea. This is a possible win condition against Thassa's Oracle's decks. When your opponent goes to win, just removing their entire deck, you just pray that they remove their entire library, and then you respond to the trigger by crop rotating for this, and forcing them to draw a card, and thus losing the game. So this is like the one sideboard card that is narrow. And honestly, there's probably just like a better card you could put in this spot. But personally, like I hate having 0 answers against Oracle decks like Doomsday. And this is just like mostly here to give myself like a peace of mind, like something to work for in like Oracle matchups. I just don't like being completely cold to that card. And like also just from a streaming standpoint, I like having something to work. I like having this card as like a win condition to work towards in those kind of matchups. So, but yeah, any opponent that has any idea about this card can easily just probably play around it. You might be able to get like somebody that happens to be clueless like once with it. So use that one time wisely. This is also can screw up an Ant player that's Hellbent with Infernal Tutor. If they play Infernal Tutor while Hellbent, in response you go search this up, force them to draw a card. Hopefully they don't draw into like an instant spell that they could cast, and then basically just counter their Demonic Tutor at that point. That was actually the original purpose of Mikokoro first being in a deck like this. But yeah, it's goofy. So, okay, that's the 75 of this current mono green post deck that I've been having a lot of success with, and also just having like a ton of fun playing. I wish I could say I was the original designer of this kind of list, but I'm not. I need to thank Aiden Riley. He's the real brains behind this green list with Reclaimers and Green Sun Zenith and Once Upon a Time. If anybody doesn't know, Aiden is a friend of mine who's very active in the 12 post discussion channels, and he's also one of the more innovative pilots of the deck too. He built a list similar to this one quite some time ago, and I decided to try it out for myself, and like now I can't put it down at all. So yeah, Aiden, thanks for this deck. I appreciate it. I've never been like the most successful brewer of these post decks. I would definitely consider myself much more of a player than a deck designer. But yeah, like I'll find a build that somebody else thinks of and like tune it the way I like it. So, but I always need to give credit to wherever I first found the list, and this one was definitely Aiden. So yeah, again, thanks Aiden. So yeah, thanks for everyone for watching this deck tech on my list. I hope this informed you of like all the card choices. I guess one final take-home message for playing this deck in Legacy that I should share with you is to keep in mind that the ultimate reason to play the post deck is to be able to win the game through your lands as much as possible. Like, it's true that the deck is a big mana ramp deck. It's true that you're going to be casting giant creatures, but all of that is a consequence of, like, the underlying game plan of just playing enough lands to win the game. Like, you take one possible board state, for example, just picture this, of the board state of a game that you might win. You have 4 Cloud Posts out, 1 Glimmer Post, that's 21 mana there, plus an Eye of Ugin. 20 is the magic number with this deck, by the way, so that'll allow you to search for Emrakul and cast it in a single turn with your Eye of Ugin. And doing that, you'll win the game like 99% of the time. If you add 1 more land to all that, your Karakas, then you win 100% of the game. So what it all really just boils down to is you won the game, essentially, simply by having 6 or 7 lands in play. Which, yeah, I don't know about anybody else, but I think that sounds crazy to me. Like, this deck just has an upper limit, this endgame of the 20 mana, plus the Eye, plus the Karakas, if you will. This endgame that, like, no other deck has. And you don't always need to go that far to that point every game to end up winning. But you always have that ultimate top end to strive for, at least. And if you do reach it, just infinite Emrakul turns is just so powerful and completely worth building your deck around. Just you get enough lands and you win. Like, yeah, just enough lands, you'll get there. That's at least how I've always viewed the philosophy of this deck. So, yeah, finally, just to wrap this all up, let me just throw in some little last self-advertisement to hopefully entice anybody watching this to come back and check out more of my content. I honestly believe 12 Posts is just as good as any other non-blue deck in Legacy, if not better than most of them, when you play it correctly. And I'm super serious about playing this strategy. Like, I've traveled to other continents to play it in Grand Prix, and just this current iteration where I'm at with this now with Reclaimer and Green Sun Zenith, it's just so solid, so consistent. I've top-8'd 4 Legacy challenges on Moto so far with a deck like this, and also I think I earned like 8 undefeated trophies in leagues. Like, the deck is just fire right now. It's the best it's been in a really long time, so take my word for it. Be sure to check out my Twitch channel, Into Play, spelled the same way as here with an underscore between the 2 words. And also to be sure to follow this YouTube channel, where I'll be posting all the events that I stream, as well as some like additional events that I've recorded on my own, just off stream. Plus, I'll probably try and get some more specific strategy videos posted, like the Glacial Chasm thing, for instance, that I was talking about earlier, if people are interested. I'm very new to streaming and recording video content, so just bear with me as I figure this all out. So the important thing is, you can come to me and watch some just top-notch competitive post play, and I look forward to just showing off this deck a ton. So one last time, I'm Tony Murata, aka Into Play. Thanks for watching.